The Star Wars animated universe, or SWAU, has consisted of Star Wars The Clone Wars, Star Wars Rebels, and I guess Star Wars Resistance if you really want. And sometime next year, Star Wars The Bad Batch will be the 4th animated show. The first show, Star Wars The Clone Wars, is considered to not only be in general great Star Wars content, but also considered to be one of the greatest animated shows ever made. The show is set between Episode 2 Attack of the Clones and Episode 3 Revenge of the Sith, and has been praised for how it expanded upon the world of the prequels. If we travel back in time to 2008, the prequel trilogy was a trilogy of films that left most fans disappointed. But what the Clone Wars did for many people was give them an appreciation for that era. It's common nowadays that people compare the backlash of the prequels to the backlash of the sequels, because both trilogies of films definitely have their haters. But it cannot be denied that the appreciation for the prequel trilogy is vastly greater than the appreciation for the sequel trilogy. And I believe that these animated shows are a big part of that. So this brings me to the topic of this video, my pitch for what I think could be the next best animated series. Spoiler alert, my series will take place after the Rise of Skywalker and overall in the events of the sequel trilogy. Now, I do want to clarify some things. If you watched my video I made last week on my pitch for the next best Star Wars video game, you would know that I made a video game pitch around Finn after the Rise of Skywalker and about how he becomes a Jedi. In my little The Goldman Star Wars universe, this show that I'm about to propose will take place after my proposed video game. But you don't need to play the game to understand the show. The stories are kind of separate. Just know that it does take place after the video game and that Finn is already kind of a Jedi. The other thing I want to say is that this show isn't going to be me giving a treatment of what I want to see in every specific season. This video is mostly just me pitching ideas that I think can be excellent topics that would be explored in my show. Before I discuss some of these topics and concepts, there are two things I want to cover, and the first one is why I think this show is best if it's set after episode 9 and not in between episodes 8 and 9, because I've seen a lot of people on the internet say that a show between episode 8 and 9 would be really interesting, and I completely disagree. If you look at the already established canon, it is already confirmed that not much happens between this time period. There are a handful of books and comics, sure, but in terms of actual big events that are happening, there isn't really any room for that. For those of you who didn't know, the time difference between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker is only 1 year, compared to the 3 years of the Clone Wars. So already, there just isn't that much time that you can explore. Also, if you just look at the beginning of The Rise of Skywalker, there's not much that could really happen in this show. The Resistance barely grows, and they're still vastly outnumbered by the First Order. What makes the Clone Wars interesting was that it was an even fight between the Separatists and the Republic. This show would just be like Rebels 2.0. But the biggest reason I don't think the show can work is because of the characters. I want this show to center around the sequel trilogy characters, the ones we saw in the film like Rey, Finn, and Poe. If we do a show between episode 8 and 9, there just isn't that much you can do with the characters given the events of the Rise of Skywalker. If you wanted to do a new show with new characters set between 8 and 9, I mean, I guess that can work, but I don't want that. I want Rey, Finn, and Poe, and I don't think it can work given this time period. The two most interesting characters in the sequel trilogy are obviously Rey and Kylo. In The Rise of Skywalker, we learn that Rey has just been chilling on Ajan Kloss most of the time, and this is further reinforced by the external material. Do we really want a show where we only see Poe, Finn, and Rose go on missions? I don't think so. And yes, you can do stuff with Kylo Ren, but is Kylo as interesting after The Last Jedi if Rey isn't a factor in the story? I just don't think so. But even if you wanted to tell stories with Kylo, the most interesting thing about him is his conflicted nature. But in The Rise of Skywalker, he is already more committed to the dark side than at the end of The Last Jedi. Of course you can tell a good story with Kylo between 8 and 9, it's just the writers would already be so limited with the time period, and I just think the potential for a show after episode 9 is so much better. And I think another big reason that a show after episode 9 would be better would be because of Finn. Unfortunately, Finn just isn't as interesting if he's not Force sensitive. They could have made him more interesting with the First Order backstory, but given what happens in The Rise of Skywalker, I don't think he's as interesting if he doesn't have the Force. So would you rather have a story where Finn is just a rebel still between 8 and 9, or a story that can explore him becoming a Jedi and learning the ways of the Force after episode 9? I think the choice is obvious. So yeah, those are my main reasons why I would much rather see a show after The Rise of Skywalker than between The Last Jedi and The Rise of Skywalker. The other thing I want to cover before I get into my topics and ideas for this show are the things I don't want to see in this show. I'm usually not picky about what I want to see in Star Wars, but since I'm giving my own pitch, there are definitely some things I just do not want to see. Number one, and maybe the most important thing, no resurrections. I know this will probably piss off a bunch of Reylos or whatever, but I do not want anyone resurrected, and this includes Ben Solo. I will die on the hill that Ben Solo should not have died in The Rise of Skywalker, but it is what it is. I do not want him resurrected. I do not want any world between worlds or any stupid time travel to see Rey reunited with Ben. He's dead, Rey needs to get over it and move on. Although, if he were to appear as a Force ghost, that's fine because he is still dead. This also means no resurrecting other characters like, God forbid, Palpatine gets brought back again. No Phasma, no Hux, no Luke, no one. If you are dead or you have an implied death, then I do not want to see you alive in this show. The other thing I do not want to see are any Sith. I am so done with the Sith. Palpatine said he was all the Sith and he died. Twice. We don't need the Sith anymore. This idea that if a story has a Jedi as its protagonist that we need the Sith to counter it is a notion that needs to end. The last 2 seasons of Rebels did not have any Sith really besides one appearance from Palpatine. Let's have new kinds of villains. Now that doesn't mean we can't have any dark side users, we can, but mix it up a little. What makes these dark side Force users different from the Sith we've seen in the past? I just want something different. And my last rule that I have is probably my hottest take, but I do not want any galactic wide wars. We've had the Clone Wars, we've had the Galactic Civil War, we've had the war with the First Order. I'm just kind of done with wars that consume the entire galaxy. Again, I want these writers to be creative, create new kinds of conflicts that are not rebellions or civil wars. Now the only exception I will give to this is if they want to continue on the war with the First Order for just a little bit. Like, if the first season is just the Resistance winning the war against the First Order, I'm fine with that as long as the other seasons after that are new conflicts. I know a lot of people said that the war ended with the Rise of Skywalker, but I feel like if the writers really wanted to, they could continue on this conflict in some other way. Now, in my proposed story, I'm not going to continue on with the war with the First Order, but it is a possibility that I wouldn't hate. So those are my 3 biggest no-nos when it comes to things I want to see in this show. Okay, now let's talk about my ideas. Again, as I said earlier, I'm not going to have a whole detailed outline of each season and what I want to happen with each character in each season. This is kind of just me pitching ideas for what I want to see, like what I want to see from each characters, what I want to see from the villains. I'm going to break down this video into 7 main parts. Each part will focus on a different aspect of the show. So the different parts of this video will be 1. The design of the show, 2. The state of the galaxy, 3. Rey, 4. Finn, 5. The other characters of the sequels, 6. Returning characters, and 7. The villains. And by the way, my makeshift title for this show is going to be Star Wars New Jedi Order. I know this was the name of a popular book series in the expanded universe, but I'm not gonna lie, I really like it, so I'm gonna steal it for this show. But anyway, let's begin with the design of this show. Now, the way I want this show designed is actually very unique from what we've seen in Star Wars animation. As I said earlier, I don't want any galactic-wide wars. So the way I want this show to be designed, which is very unique, is that we have a new conflict each season. If you look at the Clone Wars, even though there are dozens of different arcs, each season is still about the Clone Wars. Every season is about the conflict between the Republic and the Separatists. Rebels is a little bit more unique. Even though the show is called Rebels, the show at its core isn't really about the rebellion. Like, the Clone Wars was about the Clone Wars, but Rebels is really about a small group of people that call themselves family. Regardless of this, every season is still the same conflict, the Rebels versus the Empire. And then Star Wars Resistance is just the Resistance versus the First Order. With my show, I want each season to be a new conflict. Now, if you have trouble wrapping your head around this, then you should go watch the two Avatar shows, The Last Airbender and The Legend of Korra. Now I'm gonna go into very light spoilers about the two shows, so proceed with caution. The Last Airbender has a war as its center conflict, or actually very similar to the Star Wars original trilogy. Now, The Legend of Korra is a show that takes place after that war has ended. The Legend of Korra has its main character, Korra, go through new challenges and new conflicts each season. I really like this idea, especially for the time period we're talking about here in Star Wars. After the Rise of Skywalker and after the end of the war with the First Order, there's no war, but there are going to be lots of problems in the galaxy. I think it would be much more interesting if each season Rey and Finn had to face new enemies with different goals and different motivations. I want this show to be very mature, not dark necessarily, but mature. The Skywalker saga in itself isn't really mature, and that's okay, but there's always bad guys that are just clearly evil. There's never really any gray area. I don't want that with my show. I want really complex villains that aren't just simply evil and they don't want to just simply blow up planets. I want to see some complex motivations, some complex backstories that make them very unique from what we've seen in the Skywalker saga. This is also another reason why I don't want the Sith to come back, but we'll get to that later. If each conflict is morally gray, then it's really going to challenge our protagonists. What if there's a season where the central conflict has Rey and Finn on opposing sides? Not because they hate each other, but because they just fundamentally disagree on a certain conflict. Will their friendship survive it? Will they be able to compromise? These are the types of questions I want to be asked. Also, if each season is a new conflict, then it gives us reasons to explore different corners of the galaxy. Yeah, in a show like The Clone Wars, we did see many different systems, but every time we saw one of those different systems, it was for the same reason. Either the Separatists or the Republic wanted to recruit that system to their side, and almost all the time the Republic won that conflict. But in my show, if there's no big war, then why are these characters going to these different corners of the galaxy? Is there a mini conflict brewing? Again, this is just a really interesting type of topic that I would love to explore. Ideally, each season will be centered around one main conflict, maybe a 12 to 16 episode season that would really dive deep into our characters and how they would respond to these challenges. And just because the seasons will have its own main conflict, that doesn't mean that the seasons won't build off of each other. Say the first season there was a certain conflict and then Rey was able to resolve that conflict. Maybe the second season a new conflict will emerge because of the way Rey handled the conflict in season 1, and it also reinforces the notion that actions have consequences, which is something I fundamentally believe when it comes to storytelling, so I would really like to see that. Each villain ideally would be radically different from each other. In a conflict like a rebellion, you can only have so many different kinds of villains, but here you can really explore different kinds of people or different kinds of groups of people. So those are my main reasons why I would love for each season to have its own different conflict. The next thing I want to discuss is the state of the galaxy, because I feel it is one of the most important aspects of this show. I would love to see these writers explore a galaxy that isn't under one unifying government. If I was someone living in the Star Wars galaxy after the fall of the First Order, I would be like, damn, governments suck, dude. The Old Republic fell, then the New Republic fell, the Empire fell, and the First Order fell. So I would be totally open to a new kind of government. The Old Republic became corrupt and caused a separatist movement to form. Because of this war, an empire was formed afterwards that was all sorts of evil. And after a rebellion, a new republic formed that was a disaster on all fronts. If you read some of the expanded material between Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, you would really get a good look at how incompetent the New Republic was. They were so incompetent they allowed a remnant of the Empire to reform into an organization that successfully took over the galaxy for 1 year. What are they gonna do, form a new Republic? Maybe try a system where planets are just on their own and they govern themselves. Maybe have a galactic-wide system where there are like 4 or 5 nations, and geographically planets would belong to a certain nation. How would the galaxy react to this, and what would the role of the Jedi be in galactic politics? Who would maintain peace between these nations when there's a conflict brewing? I think this system of government where there's these different nations or just no central government at all can lead to some very interesting story ideas. Also, I would love to see how the galaxy would respond to the Jedi. It's been about 50 years or so since the events of Revenge of the Sith, and the galaxy must be aware of how the Jedi were a big reason for the rise of the Empire. Would they even welcome the Jedi in galactic politics? Like, sure, Rey killed the Emperor again, but is that enough to convince everyone in the galaxy that the Jedi should still be around? Luke did make good points in The Last Jedi. The problems of the galaxy can all stem back to the Jedi and the Sith. What if the galaxy is kind of done with the Force? How would Rey and her potential new Jedi Order operate in a galaxy that doesn't want them? Maybe that could be one of the main conflicts one of the seasons, where the galaxy doesn't want the Jedi around because of all the damage they've done. I think that's something that could be very interesting. If the galaxy did approach this kind of system where there was no central government, I would like to see a UN type organization that would try and maintain peace and maybe have a difficult relationship with the Jedi. Now, I don't think this role of peacekeepers in the galaxy should solely be for the Jedi either. Maybe have a planet like Coruscant be the one neutral planet where people can go to discuss politics. Also, hopefully we can get some better explanation of the politics of the galaxy during the events of the sequel trilogy, because we all know that is completely non-existent in the films. I can go on for hours about why I would love to see this kind of approach to the galaxy in this show, but overall those are the main reasons why I would love to see this explored in my show. Now let's talk about Rey. Rey is the character that I want to be the protagonist of the show. Not like how Ahsoka was kind of the protagonist of the Clone Wars. I want her to be the legit center focus of the show. Now this doesn't mean that the other characters are less important. You can have a protagonist along with other characters who go on really powerful journeys as well. As I will get to later, I think Finn and Poe can still be really important with Rey being the center focus. So what do I want to see from Rey in this series? Well, I want to see Rey mature into a much wiser woman. Let's look at the relationship between Rey and the galaxy. After the Rise of Skywalker, she's only 20 years old. So say this show takes place 2 years after the Rise of Skywalker, then she's still only 22 and she's the head of the Jedi. Also, Rey spent her whole life as either a loner scavenger on Jakku or a member of a rebellion. Now she's asked to be the leader of the Jedi? What would the galaxy think of this? If all the major systems had representatives or senators, what would they think about a 22-year-old girl with no political experience being in charge of the Jedi? I want to see Rey face a lot of political challenges in this show. Maybe one season there could be this politician who hates Force users because of all the problems they brought to the galaxy and doesn't want Rey to be involved with politics at all, and maybe there's some sort of conflict around that. How would Rey respond? What would she be like in a political setting where she's trying to convince the galaxy that the Jedi should be brought back? I feel like there are 3 main struggles a character can go through: physical, emotional, and moral struggles, and obviously you can have some combination of these 3. The sequel trilogy is about Rey going through emotional struggles. She doesn't really physically struggle, and she definitely never has her morals questioned. I want to see her morals challenged in this series. I want a season to begin with Rey holding a strong belief, and throughout that season I want her to seriously doubt that belief. For example, Rey may begin this series with the notion that Jedi should be involved in galactic politics, and maybe she also believes that anyone who is Force sensitive across the galaxy should be brought to her academy to be trained. Maybe Rey has a bunch of students who help her make some serious political blunders. What would the consequences be? In Season 7 of the Clone Wars, we learned from the Martez sisters that the Jedi could pretty much do whatever they want and not have to worry about the consequences. I want Rey to face those political consequences. How would Rey respond when the galaxy doesn't want her, but she knows the galaxy needs her? Rey is going to have allies. She's going to have enemies. How is she able to solve problems in the galaxy without a lightsaber? Is she even capable of making diplomatic solutions? These are questions I would love to see answered. I also really want to see Rey struggle with the Jedi. Rey has been a loner her whole life. I can't imagine she plays well with others. In The Rise of Skywalker, she is constantly making her own decisions, and almost every time those decisions put her friends in serious danger. The best example is when she wanted to go confront Kylo, and Chewie almost got killed. I want Rey to be called out for her careless actions sometimes. Obviously, Rey is someone who's compassionate, but is that enough when it comes to training a student? Would she be a good teacher to Finn? How often in Star Wars is the teacher younger than the student? Because Finn is like 2 or 3 years older than her. I think the most interesting thing that could happen to Rey is if one of her pupils turns to the dark side. Now, this isn't going to be a repeat of the Ben Solo situation where he kills everyone else. Maybe one of Rey's students grows jealous or angry for whatever reason and becomes evil. How would Rey respond? Would Rey try to kill this student? Did Rey try to turn him or her back to the light side? How would Rey handle the other students who might want to kill this turned student? I might just be talking out of my ass right now, but these are all ideas I really think could put Rey in really difficult situations. I want to see Rey in lose-lose situations and face the consequences of her decisions. I also at one point want to see a villain that is just vastly superior to Rey physically. Rey is clearly strong in the Force, but she's never really lost a fight or been significantly hurt. Yeah, she died, but that doesn't really count. I want to see her face a villain that she feels confident in beating and then proceeds to not only lose, but legit get her ass kicked. So badly that she gets knocked out or something and maybe even loses a limb. Maybe the theme that Rey needs to learn is that not every situation can be solved by beating someone in a lightsaber fight. Yeah, she was able to turn Ben back to the light side, but what if the person will simply just stay on the dark side if they are already on the dark side? Or what if this person is not even a Force user, but someone who is just vastly more skilled in combat than Rey is? Again, this is just another idea I would love to see. I know a lot of these ideas are fairly vague, I get that, but I just want these ideas tested because I think the most interesting thing you can do with Rey is to challenge her morally. But there is one specific storyline I think would be the most interesting thing you can do with Rey, and that's if the public somehow found out that Rey was a Palpatine. Luke and Leia in one of the novels named Bloodline did have to deal with the galaxy finding out that they were related to Darth Vader, but that's not the same thing. Vader was a victim to Palpatine, and he did ultimately save the galaxy and die a good man. Palpatine is literally the devil of the galaxy. He is the one man who can be blamed for the death of billions and the problems of the past 50 years. How would people respond to Palpatine's granddaughter being the head of the Jedi? Rey has accepted that some things are stronger than blood, but that doesn't mean other people have. I don't know how it would go down specifically, but that is probably the biggest challenge Rey could face. One last thing about Rey that I want to talk about is, for the lack of a better phrase, her love life. Now, if Rey gets even remotely close to another man, then Reylos are going to freak out everywhere, but the writers can't worry about that. Rey is a 22-year-old girl. She is going to take interest in some other men. What if one season there's this guy who shows up to Rey's academy and he's clearly very attractive and he's like, oh yeah, I'm Force sensitive, I need someone to train me. Rey would be completely overwhelmed. How would she respond? Can she separate her feelings while being his teacher? We saw how Rey reacted when Kylo Ren was shirtless. She was a huge dork. What if she falls for a guy who is clearly manipulating her and everyone is telling her he's a bad influence, but she doesn't listen? This could be something that Rey learns from. Now, just like the previous section, I could talk about my ideas for Rey for like hours, but I think I got the main things I wanted to say off my chest. Now let's talk about Finn. Now, as I said earlier, I did make a whole video talking about a video game idea I had surrounding Finn, but in the event that video game doesn't happen in my little Goldman Star Wars universe, here are some of my ideas for the character. The obvious thing I would like to see is Finn's relationship with the First Order somewhat expanded upon. I think a really neat plot point for a season could revolve around former First Order stormtroopers. Unlike Imperial stormtroopers, First Order stormtroopers were taken from birth. After the war, what is the galaxy going to do with the ones who survived? These are people who have known nothing but the First Order their whole lives. I think this could be an excellent season-long problem. Maybe this could be something that Finn disagrees with others, so he goes rogue. Maybe this causes him to have some serious disagreements with Rey. Maybe Finn would leave Rey's new Jedi Order so he can help these former stormtroopers. I think that would be something that is really powerful. I know a lot of people want to see a Stormtrooper rebellion from Finn, which is what my game was about, by the way, but here it may be more difficult to do considering the First Order is gone. I wouldn't have a problem if the first season was devoted to finishing off the First Order, and that was where his Stormtrooper rebellion was, and then in the second season the displacement of the Stormtroopers was the main conflict. I think that could be a really interesting 2-season arc where we'd see a lot of change from Finn. Maybe he meets old friends who refuse to leave the First Order and Finn is forced to take them down. I want to see Finn make tough choices. He won't really have the same responsibility as Rey does considering she is the leader of the Jedi, but he still should be someone who is really important. Also, he's in a very similar situation to Rey. He also spent his whole life as either a stormtrooper or a rebel. What would he be like in a political setting? Would people not trust him because of his past? Maybe Finn has some serious trust with politicians and Rey has to be the one who tries to mediate that. I also think a really neat arc they can do with Finn is if at some point he is tempted by the dark side. Maybe there's a decision that happens with the First Order stormtroopers that Finn really disagrees with and it infuriates him. How would Rey respond if Finn was tempted by the dark side? Would he even be tempted by the dark side? These are interesting storylines I would love to see Finn go down, but overall, there isn't much I want to see from Finn. I think his relationship to the First Order and those he knew in the First Order is the most interesting thing they can do with Finn, and I would love to see that. Now let's look at some of the other characters as well. As much as I love Star Wars, I don't think about these characters all the time, so I don't really have much in mind. Even though Poe was one of the main characters of the sequels, he's never really been a favorite of mine, so I'm not really too interested in seeing where his story goes. But I think something they could do that would be really interesting for Poe is if he joined some sort of other military. Obviously after the war, the Resistance isn't really a thing anymore, so where would Poe take his talents? Maybe there's a military for a group of systems or whatever, and he becomes the general, and at some point Rey is doing something that's not in the best interest of this government, and the government sends Poe to go stop whatever Rey and the other Jedi are doing. Would he listen to Rey? Would he listen to the government he serves? I think testing Poe's allegiance if he's not really aligned with Rey and Finn and the people he knew throughout the sequels is something that could be really interesting for Poe. When it comes to Rose or Jannah, I really have no ideas what they could do with them. I guess they could try to make Rose a little more interesting. I don't think most people dislike her because of her character, I just think she was poorly used in the movie. And when it comes to Jannah, I know they hinted in the Rise of Skywalker that her and Lando would try and find out where she was from, but to be honest, I have no interest in seeing that. I just don't care about Jannah as a character. Although I have thought about Chewie for a little bit. I think something good for Chewie would be for him to simply retire. Wookiees usually live to be around 400 years old, and he's like 240 right now. I just feel he's been through so much that he deserves to rest for the rest of his life. I mean, his best friend in Han Solo was killed, he lost Luke and Leia too. He's been through so much. Maybe have one season devoted to some conflict with the Wookiees, and at the end, he officially says goodbye to the Resistance and just lives a happy life. I think that would certainly be a nice way to conclude his story. I certainly hope he doesn't die or anything like that. He's been through way too much to not have a happy ending. The next thing I want to talk about is returning characters. Now you may be wondering, what do I mean by returning characters? I'm not talking about the characters that we've seen in the movies like Finn, Poe, Rey, or Rose. When I say returning characters, I'm talking about characters that we haven't seen in the movies, like the ones we've seen in the shows. I think Lucasfilm is trying to make all the shows, both animated and live action, into one connected type of universe. I wouldn't be surprised if down the line we saw some of these other animated characters show up, whether it be in The Mandalorian or my pitch for an animated show. But this brings up the heavily rumored Rebels successor show. For those of you who don't know, there have been heavy rumors that there is going to be a third major show that kind of follows the storyline of Clone Wars and Rebels. Clone Wars and Rebels are like the two major shows, and Resistance and soon to be the Bad Batch are kind of like the smaller side shows. This rumored Rebels successor show will somewhat continue the storyline from Rebels and be that third major show. If this does happen, then I would assume that there wouldn't be a sequel trilogy era show until this show finishes. Say hypothetically this Rebels sequel show does happen, then I would fully expect my sequel trilogy show to incorporate some of those characters from that successor show. Also, whatever happens in The Mandalorian, there's definitely a possibility that those characters could show up as well in my show. There's only a 25-year time period between The Mandalorian and The Rise of Skywalker, so it is a possibility. But overall, I would love to include characters from other shows in my show. I just don't know if characters like Ezra or Ahsoka would be around during the time of the sequel trilogy. And the last aspect of this show I want to talk about are the villains. I think the quality of the villains can really make or break a show, so this topic is really important to me. The only rule that I have when it comes to these villains are that the villains are not returning characters. I want these villains to be new characters that have their own set of backstories and motivations for what they're doing. Now this goes back to the design of the show. I would ideally like each season to have a different main villain. This doesn't mean that they can't overlap over seasons, but each season would have a different main villain. Also, when it comes to villains, I would love for them to all be really different from each other. Maybe one villain would be a surviving general from the First Order who is an evil person with interesting motivations, and the next season the main villain is a teenager who became strong with the Force and wants to oppose Rey and her new Jedi Order. The main purpose I want for these villains is to really challenge Rey. I think the best villains are the ones that have really good points and really interesting ideas, but what makes them a villain is the way they go about executing their ideas. Rey is someone who is incredibly naive. She needs villains that really make her question aspects of the galaxy. For example, maybe there's a man out there that was hurt by Kylo Ren in some way. When he learns that Kylo Ren was a former Jedi, he has a mission that he doesn't want the Jedi to exist because of the possibility that they could hurt more people. Or maybe it's an older fellow who was just around during the Clone Wars and remembers how the Jedi became selfish before the end of the war. Rey could start to question the role of the Jedi and their place in the galaxy. Ideally, the motivations of these villains wouldn't be this simple, but something far more complex. Again, reaching back to The Legend of Korra, the villains of those shows were all wildly different from each other and had really different philosophies. Now, if you haven't watched this show, I'm not going to spoil the show for you that much, but what I'm about to say isn't really going to make any sense. But if you don't want to know anything, then skip to this timestamp. They all had a noble goal, but the way they went about their goal was what made them villains. Amon wanted equality, but through persecution. Unalaq wanted reconnection to the spirits, but through destruction. Zahir wanted freedom, but through chaos. Kuvir wanted unity, but through submission. These are all villains that had vastly unique goals and vastly unique motivations. All these villains really challenged Korra. This is something that I want to see for Rey. Villains that are vastly different from each other that challenge Rey in different ways. And those are all my ideas that I would love to see in a sequel trilogy animated series. But before I finish this video, I do want to talk about why I think a sequel trilogy animated series, or really just any sequel trilogy content, is really important. The sequel trilogy does seem to be at the latter end of its hatred, but we don't know how long it's gonna last. For the past almost 3 years now, there have been no shortage of criticisms of The Last Jedi, and after almost a year of people criticizing The Rise of Skywalker, things seem to be settling down just a little bit. But that doesn't change the fact that this trilogy of films are still widely disliked, and if we go back about 15 years, the same could be said about the prequels. However, there is something that George Lucas clearly did right with the prequels, given that all these years later, the prequels are one of the most popular film trilogies in pop culture. Why is that the case? Now, while I am on the younger side, I am old enough to remember the hatred for these films. Literally almost no one liked them, and even less people appreciated them. However, today, appreciation for the prequels is through the roof. Prequel memes is one of the most popular subreddits, and the thought of prequel-era content excites a lot of the fanbase. Again, why is this happening? Why aren't the sequels getting the same love? One popular reason that is often shared is that the kids that loved the prequels 15 to 20 years ago are now grown up and have a voice. While this is definitely part of it, I feel this is a cop-out and doesn't acknowledge the big picture and all of the hard work George Lucas did. I would say the biggest reason the prequels are so popular actually don't really have to do with the films themselves, but everything to do with what surrounds the films. George Lucas was a filmmaker who was not easily swayed. Once he had an idea or a story he wanted to be told, he would do everything in his power to realize his vision, whether or not that story was good or bad. Now, this type of mentality definitely has its cons, but I actually feel it has much more pros. I bet if you asked people in 2005 if they'd rather have a high-budgeted animated series set after Return of the Jedi with Luke, Han, and Leia, or during the Clone Wars with Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Anakin's Padawan, I think most people would choose the former. However, this is not what Lucas wanted to do. Lucas didn't listen to the people that hated his product. Instead of trying to satisfy the prequel haters, he devoted his time to help flesh out the prequel era for those who loved it. And if you look back to the early 2000s, there was a plethora of prequel content. While there were tons of books and comics, there was also a shit ton of video games and television shows as well. And these weren't bad games or shows either. The Clone Wars is regarded as one of the best animated shows ever, and there are plenty of excellent Clone Wars era video games. So what this did was flesh out the era for those kids. Lucas didn't abandon the prequels after they were done, he gave more to its fans. So now 15 years later, all those people, kids and adults, have fond memories of that era. So while most people at least acknowledge episodes 1 and 2 were poor films, their love for that era is stronger than ever. Now, what can the sequels learn from this? They're in the same position that the prequels were in back in 2005. Well, it's actually really simple. Just don't abandon this era. I say double down on these characters and this storyline in this part of the universe. What Lucasfilm needs to realize is that those who will go out of their way no matter what to criticize their product are not going to support you in the long term. These are not the kind of people that you want to cater to. Most of this passionate rage from people online with the sequel era, they're not going to give this era a chance anyway, so why are you listening to them? However, this does lead to my concerns. It does seem like Lucasfilm is abandoning the sequel era, which is really unfortunate. Because if you look at Lucasfilm under Disney, they have been really reactionary when it comes to all of their products. Everyone hated the prequels, so let's make The Force Awakens nothing like the prequels. The Force Awakens was too similar to A New Hope, so let's make The Last Jedi completely different and subvert everyone's expectations. The Last Jedi was too risky, so let's make The Rise of Skywalker backtrack on some of those choices and bring back a known villain. See how Disney Star Wars has been somewhat reactionary? There are no sequel era video games right now, no shows, and very few books and comics. So yeah, it's not really looking so good for sequel fans. Fortunately, it's only been a year since The Rise of Skywalker ended and the trilogy was concluded. There is still plenty of time to flesh out this era. Best case scenario, we would get the actors back for a live action series, but given how much Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, and Oscar Isaac seem to be done with Star Wars, the odds of that happening are very slim, so the second best choice would be an animated series, which is what I've been talking about all video. Poe already has tons of backstory in the books and comics, but Rey and Finn have close to none. In this show, I just want to see these characters and maybe some of the other characters expanded upon. And it's not just about bettering the story of the Star Wars canon. I've been part of the positive Star Wars community for a while now, and I don't care how many people say they hate this trilogy, there are so many great people who love this trilogy with all their heart. Creating new content around the sequel trilogy will not only satisfy these fans, but it's also likely that it would bring new fans into the sequel era fandom and give more people reason to appreciate this era. But anyway, that is my pitch for the next best Star Wars animated series. Thank you everyone so much for watching. If you haven't already, please smash that like button, it really helps out with the video. And also don't forget to subscribe. I am really close to 1,000 subs, which is crazy, but yeah, thank you so much. If you want to see more of me, then go follow me on Twitter at TheGoldman25. Also, don't forget to check out the Chatoween Show on Star Wars Only's channel. We are actually now on iTunes and Spotify, so if you don't have time to watch the actual YouTube video, you can listen to us there. It's a great podcast, I highly recommend it, and you can listen to more of me. And one last thing, I'm not sure if anyone's noticed, but I removed all my streams off of my channel. What I plan on doing is re-uploading them to a new channel called The Goldman Streams in the future. So if that is something you're interested in seeing, then stay tuned, those streams are not gone, and all future streams will originally be on my main channel, and then once they end, they will go to my new channel, The Goldman Streams. Thanks again everyone so much for watching this video. This one was really hard and to take a long time to make, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.